Today is May 29, 2024, and we are at LaGrave Avenue Christian Reformed Church, Grand Rapids, Michigan. We're doing a Veterans History interview with Paul Mitchell, who served in the U.S. Army. And Paul lives at 1811 Martindale, Southwest, Wyoming, Michigan. And Paul's date of birth is September 11, 1947. And my name as interviewer is Wally Erickson, and I'm a volunteer interviewer with the History Department at Grand Valley State University, Allendale, Michigan. And Paul and I are both members of LaGrave Avenue Christian Reformed Church, so hence we're using their Sunday school classroom. I might also point out that Paul's wife, Mary Mitchell, is present during the interview. Now, Paul, what war and branch of service did you serve in?
I served in the United States Army in the Vietnam conflict, and I was in country from April of 1969 through March of 1970.
Well, to begin with, let me ask you where you were raised and where you went to school.
Okay, my father was a Baptist minister, so I was raised in several areas in Indiana. That's where we live primarily, but I consider Fort Wayne, Indiana, my hometown. That's where he had his longest pastorate while I was living with them. So I would consider Fort Wayne, Indiana. But we also did live in Crawfordsville, Indiana, and North Terre Haute, Indiana, and Rochester, Indiana, before Fort Wayne.
Where did you go to high school?
Went to high school at Northside High School in Fort Wayne.
And when did you graduate? 1966.
Graduated with the class of 66.
Did you join the Army right away, or was there some time?
I went to, after graduation, the following fall, I moved down to Louisville, Kentucky, and I went to an electronics trade school down there. It's called United Electronics Institute, and then at the end of that, then I had to make myself available for the draft.
And when was that then? When?
That would have been 1968. In the spring of 1968.
Did you actually receive a draft notice?
I did.
Then?
Yes, I did.
What did that feel like when you got that in the mail?
Well, it was coming, so. And it was an obligation you had to get out of the way before you could do anything else. So.
How did you handle the draft notice?
Well, actually, it was sent to my home of my address of record, which would have been, because I was still in Louisville. I got a call from my mother, and she said, "By the way," she said, "you've got a letter here from the draft board here in Allen County." And I said, "Well, open it up and see what it is." I said, "I think I know what it is." She also knew what it is too, you know. And she said, I said, "Is it just a renewal of the deferment?" And she said, "No." She said, "This is the actual letter of notice." And I said, "When do they want me to report?" And she said, "You need to report downtown at 5:30 in the morning," which meant that I was to report to the draft office at 5:30 in the morning, and a bus would pick me up and take me down to the induction center to Indianapolis. So.
Would this be your physical that you were initially?
Mm-hmm. This would have been the physical, yeah.
I see.
And so.
What did you do with the draft notice as far as proceeding with?
Well, after of course, I had to take that letter down there and showed it to him, and then I think I hung on to it until I was into basic training. I think I tore it up and tossed it in the wastebasket or something like that. It was.
So you took it to a local recruiter then?
Yeah, you took it down. You took it down, and I had to show it again at Indianapolis and everything too, so they could match it on a roster that they had. And but an interesting thing, while I was in basic training, that's when they switched from the draft. Well, they still had the draft, but then they started giving out the lottery numbers and everything. I remember. So I was in basic training when they did that first lottery drawing, and I remember I had a kid come up to me. While I was polishing, I think it was polishing a pair of boots or something like that, he came up to me and said, "Hey, Mitch, I sure hope I get a high number." And then we laughed.
So you actually enlisted then?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I went in as a draftee, but after taking the bank of tests and everything and saw what I could qualify for, I decided to take one of the MOSs, and that guaranteed me getting in after basic training, being sent to that specialty.
When did you report for basic training? What date do you remember?
Yeah, it was October 14th, 1968. That's when I reported for induction. So.
And where did you actually go for basic training?
Fort Campbell, Kentucky.
How long were you there?
I was there for 8 weeks, I got lucky because by the day we graduated, it was in late December. So instead of sending us on to our AIT station, they gave us all they gave all of us an extra 2 weeks of leave, and so I was able to go home for Christmas and then report to Fort Lee, Virginia, for AIT, or Advanced Individual Training. To the Fort Lee is the center for the Quartermaster Corps of the United States Army, and so I reported there for supply school there.
Was supply school?
Right.
Is what?
Yeah.
What you attended then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let me back up a little bit to basic training. Well, to begin with, why did you pick the Army? Or it looks like the Army may have picked you.
I made myself available for the draft. I could have recruited into the Navy or the Air Force, but those were 4-year enlistments. I was engaged at the time. My fiance was still going to college, and the Army had hitch was the shortest. If I'd stayed at under draftee status, it would have been a 2-year commitment. If not, but going the extra year to get the specialty that I wanted was a 3-year. So
it was 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years. So
when
it's
you signed up for supply
still
school.
shorter than what the Navy or the Air Force would have been.
Do you remember any of your fellow recruits, draftees, in basic training?
Basic training, yeah, I remember several of them. I
friendships?
don't remember names. I remember several of them, a bunch of them. Several of them were National Guardsmen from Oklahoma, and they came from ranching families. And I remember they would talk about they all had their general pilot's license, because when you're a rancher, you're flying around. You had these big spreads down there. So when you're checking where your cattle are, you're flying around. So I remember those guys. There were a couple of guys. There was a couple guys from the East Coast, where I'm from originally. I was born out there, so I have a lot of family out in the New England, and so those kids were kind of interesting. Had one guy who was from Michigan, and he was also he'd been a pitcher in college, and he had just finished up college and everything, and he was the Detroit Tigers were looking at him as was really interesting. Anytime he any spare minute he can, he was picking up a pebble or something. He was tossing it at a tree or something like that, just to keep his eye good and everything.
Typical ball player, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember any of your drill instructors? What were they like?
One, our senior drill instructor was a guy. His last name was Peterson. He was a big big tall Swede, had a raspy voice, and he was tough but fair. And then we had another one, who was he was a staff sergeant, and he was not much taller than I am. I mean, I'm 5'6". I think this guy was about 5'7", but he was very tough. He was the one who actually came, who was actually waiting for us when I arrived at Fort Campbell. He's the one who came on the bus and hustled us off the buses and everything. So at 3 in the morning, which was really rough.
I wanted to ask you about some experiences in basic training. You know, physical training, I suppose.
Yeah.
What particularly stands out in your mind?
Well, we took our first preliminary test. It was about maybe 4 weeks after we'd been in. And I remember we were out in the testing area, and one of the first events you do is the 50-meter low crawl. And it was in pouring rain, and I mean, we just got soaked. So the rest of the test was done, I mean, just soaking wet and everything. But I remember our times on the low crawl was good because it was on a canvas mat that was marked off like in lanes. Well, with that wet canvas, I mean, you just scooted down that mat like it. So they had to adjust our time. And later on, when we did it, when we did that, that particular event was done indoors, when the mat was dry and everything. The rest of it was done outdoors. It was down in Kentucky, even though it was right about the turn of November to December and everything. We took the final test. It was still a relatively good day. So it wasn't too cold or anything like that.
Was it in basic training where you went through certain testing, I assume, to come up with a military occupational specialty then, or?
Yeah, it was right at the beginning. Right as soon as you arrived down at Fort Campbell, they run you through the banks of tests and everything. So, and I scored high, and then they about a day or two later they peeled us out of a formation. And they gave me a list of 3 or 4 doors. We're out in front of this. It was a brick building down there. It was obviously a office building, and I needed to go. So the first one I went to, it was I qualified for officer candidate school. Mm-hmm. So I went in and talked to the lieutenant there, and told me that there were only 3 corps opening. The Army is divided into corps, that they were accepting officer candidates into their OCS, and that one of them was field artillery, one of them was infantry, and one of them was armor. And so those are the combative arms, and I didn't particularly want to be a second lieutenant in either one of those corps, so anyway, he said, here's the information. If you're interested, he said, you can get back in touch with me. He says, you have X number of times we can get your orders. He said, we can get your orders changed for when you're finished with basic training. The next one was that I qualified for was Special Forces. But the only proviso was is I would have to volunteer for Airborne Jump School, because before you can become a Green Beret, you have to have active jump status. And I wasn't interested in that either. And the other one was Warrant Officer Flight School to be trained as a helicopter pilot. But the fact that I didn't have 20/20 vision uncorrected washed me out. So then on the fourth, so then they also told me that I had qualified for a lot of stuff, and one was a supply school and everything,
So that's what you picked?
That's what I picked, yeah.
You had some choice at that point, is that?
Well, there was some choice, and it turned out interesting because once I got down to jump ahead a little bit, we can come back on this, but once I got down to Fort Lee, I went through the initial training for that occupation especially. Just for the record, it was called the MOS 76P20, which is a stock control and accounting clerk. We finished our training, and they held me over now for another 6 weeks because I qualified for the 76P20M, which was using it was the equivalent of an IBM. It was an electronic accounting machine. It was equivalent to an old IBM 470 electronic accounting machine, which used some memory and everything, and used punch cards and everything, and ledgers with the metal magnetic strips on the back. And because some of the units over there were starting to change over from punch card and pencil to these kind of units, and the configuration was they were in two trailers. The unit record equipment, or the key punches, were in one trailer, and the CPU and the central processing unit and the accounting machine was in the others, and so I qualified for that. So it qualified for that, and it also meant that MOS was protected because I would not be. Once I got in country, if I was sent to Vietnam, I wouldn't be rotated to the infantry if they needed it, or any of the other combat arms, that I would be sent to one of those supply units with one of those configured, with one of those
I assume
units.
was because of the extra training and
everything, yeah.
They really couldn't afford to just send you the infantry.
And the perk was, the perk was when I got to Vietnam, well, I was there, I was able to work in air conditioning, so which during the hot season was good, and then it was, and of course it's air conditioning. It dehumidifies the air, so I was in relatively dry air during the rainy season. So,
Paul, did you go right to Fort Lee to supply school after basic training?
Right after that Christmas break, yeah.
And how long were you at Fort Lee then?
I would say about 8 weeks. That's not true either. That's maybe about 14 weeks.
14 total then?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then from there, where were you transferred?
From there, I was given a month leave with orders. Came down on orders for Vietnam, and so I was sent home for a month, and then had given orders to report to the Oakland Army Depot.
Where were you first in Vietnam? Is it just where were you?
When I arrived when I arrived to Oakland, we were there for about a week for processing. You're given your new set of clothes, because I was when I came over from Fort Lee, I was told to keep my stateside fatigues. Mm-hmm. Leave those at home. The only thing I was to report in was the Class A uniform and khakis. And then they issued the jungle fatigues and the jungle boots and everything.
When did you arrive in Vietnam?
Then I arrived in Vietnam in April of 1969.
69.
Yeah, I think it was about April 7th, I believe it was. At least that's when we got on the plane in California. And when we got on, they announced that April 7th is considered what they called it a DROS date. That meant that I think it was an acronym that stood for date of return from overseas duty, I think is what it stood for. Mm-hmm. So when we crossed the international day line, the pilot came on and said, "Congratulations, everybody! You all have now one day of service in South Vietnam." So,
and what unit did you join then in Vietnam?
When I arrived in Vietnam, and after they processed me, I was sent to to a unit called the 149th Repair Parts Company, and it was part of the 503rd Maintenance Battalion. And that particular unit was located at at a base camp for the 1st Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division, and that was up at Camp Evans. And it was just off Highway 1, a little bit northwest of the city of Way, and it was about 21 miles south of the DMZ. So that's how far north it was.
In the I-Corps area.
In the I-Corps, yeah, in northern I-Corps. Yeah.
And you mentioned your initial assignment was in an air-conditioned building, or?
Well, the building was the trailer units are air conditioned, and so normally what you do, those trailer units, they have 2 doors on each side. What we did, the configuration was you would just kind of put them up, and then you'd build a small hooch between the 2 of them, and that was the entire maybe the IT area for this supply unit here. So
was that because of the computer equipment that was in the?
Was because, well, yeah, you had to keep all that. Yeah, because had to keep it cool, you know, and also it was a punch card, still partly punch cards, and so you had to keep those ledges in the humidity. Punch cards will swell, yeah. and then they will stick in the card readers and the key punches and stuff like that. So you had to keep some climate control and everything. So
what was your job then with?
So it's basically it's a stock accounting clerk and everything, you know. And we would, general processing of orders coming in, and then pick lists going out to the warehouse, and the guys out in the warehouse then would pull the parts, round them up for the individual units, and the individual units would come in. And
how large was your company? How many soldiers would?
Let's see here. Headquarters company headquarters company was big, about 250 guys, because not only did you have us, but you also had the headquarters. These were the clerks and everything for the battalion headquarters and everything too. But that whole unit also had the different specialties, because being a maintenance battalion, you've got the companies that specialize in the maintenance and repair of howitzers, both towed and self-propelled, and tanks, and we also had an electronics shop which took care of field radios and things of that sort. And so just about anything that you had, we even had a campus shop that.
Let me back up a little bit. How did you get to Camp Evans? Did they fly you there by helicopter, or how did you get there?
It was kind of piecemeal. I took a C-130 out of Townsend Air Force Base up to the Air Force Base at Da Nang.
Saigon, then,
at Da Nang, right? Yeah, at Da Nang. Then I was sent to then you were sent to a transfer company by truck. You know, you're trucked over there, and then you truck back, and then I trucked back. Then I went to get up to Phu Bai, which would have been the next stop. I was taken back to the Air Force Base, and I got on a Chinook helicopter. And so I get off at this. They flew into the airstrip there, but you didn't land on the air. I mean, you landed on the tarmac, and I went in and and found out where I said I want to know where the 503rd Maintenance Battalion is, the headquarters company, and that was at Camp Hochmuth. So I walked up, carried all my stuff up to into the compound, and I told them who I was and everything, and they said, "Oh yeah," they said, "You're going further north up to Camp Evans." So they sent me back to the airport, gave me a boarding pass, sent me back, and they said there'll be another helicopter there to get you. There were about 3 of us, and they told us to. So we got there, and they said, "Yeah, go back over the tarmac and wait." So we waited for about an hour, and next thing we know, the Chinook lumbered in, landed. the back gate came down, and the loadmaster waved to us, so we came on, and we went up to Camp Evans, and they landed right at the end of the airstrip, which was a metal airstrip. It wasn't concrete or asphalt. It was all metal, and I got off, and there was got off, and somehow, I don't forget how we found it, but the 149th Repair Parts Company was down across the road and down a path in a bowl-shaped area. And that was my new unit. So we got down there. This was about maybe it's about 5 o'clock in the evening, and so they put us up in a command tent, and they said, "We'll get you parceled out to your platoons and everything tomorrow morning." And everything. So
this was way out in the field, then, is that right?
It is, yeah. It's way out of one end of the airstrip at Camp Evans, back right up on the compound barrier. I mean, there were, there was 3 bunkers at our three bunkers that lookout bunkers that our company was responsible for, and you had guard mount, and so we had guys that pulled detailed guard mount every night.
Did you have to pull guard duty?
I did,
also,
yeah.
On
When
a rotating basis or whatever.
Yeah, you sure did. Yeah, that was so. It was understood that you didn't have to do duty the next day if you were on day duty, because you'd done bunker guard that night. So.
Give me a couple of memorable experiences, if you can. Hopefully not too many, but
we were out. Shortly after I got there, I'll give you shortly after I got to Camp Evans. This was when the 101st Airborne Division was ordered to further secure the Ashaw Valley, which was just maybe 25 miles to the west of us. And they were, I forget the number of the hill, but it was called Hamburger Hill. And if you remember, it was quite a pitched battle to the Marines landed at the base of that. We had in the 101st Airborne Division, they had to fight their way up to the top of that thing, and it took. And so we had planes going in and out of Camp Evans, just about round the clock, to supply that effort. And the idea was to get that hill so they could command the Ashaw Valley, which at the time was quite a supply route of the Ho Chi Minh Trail inside South Vietnam, not way over, because after you get on the other side of the Ashaw Valley, there's another mountain range, and then on the other side is the Cambodia border. Then, so the Vietnamese had. Not only they were using Cambodia as a supply route, but they were also trying to establish one through the Ashaw Valley too, which would kind of shorten it just a little bit.
Was your compound ever attacked, or rocket fire, or mortar fire?
I was on night duty then, and so since we were down in a bowl, we had sandbag bunkers built right up to the top of the trailers and everything. So. You were actually in a bunker, but we took a rocket in the compound one night, probably about maybe 3 weeks after I'd arrived in country. So that was my baptismal fire right there. And we did have one guy got wounded and got decorated for it, but it was a flesh wound, and so.
How long were you then there at Camp Evans?
Camp Evans. I was there for about 2.5 months, and headquarters company needed some. There was kind of a trade. There was two of us were sent down to headquarters company, and 2 of headquarters company were sent up to us, and I think they were trying to balance off experience. with the operators and everything. And so since we were since I and another friend of mine were the newest ones, they called us together one day and they said, "Pack up. You're leaving on the courier truck for this afternoon to down to Phu Bai." And I said, "Well, how long are we going to be down there?" And he said, "You're being assigned down there." So.
And what unit did you join there?
Then I went down to headquarters company, the 503rd Maintenance Battalion. And the interesting part about that unit, it was a activated reserve unit from the Boston, Massachusetts area, and so a lot of those guys were, and I had family back in New England, so it was quite interesting to mix with those guys because there was some commonality there. But when their tour was finished, that entire unit packed up and left. And for us, for those of us who were in the regular Army, we were just transferred over to the new unit coming in, which was the 2nd Maintenance Battalion that was ordered up from Vung Tau further south on the coast.
What were your duties with 2nd Maintenance?
It's the same thing that we had. It was just going from one warehousing operation to the other. Mm-hmm. And so when we got down to although we were just a repair parts company up there, when I got down to headquarters company at the 503rd, that was a much bigger compound, and so we had the different specialty service platoons down there. Mm-hmm. And it was a huge compound because, and it wasn't quite as primitive as Camp Evans. There was running water down there, thanks to the Seabees, and also the Republic of Korea had a group of engineers down there, so they ran a generator, so we didn't have to use the diesel generators, so we had lights and running water, which made it a little.
So Phu Bai, I'm assuming, was a little more secure than Camp Evans was.
It was, yeah.
A little more in the rear.
Yeah, you had Phu Bai, and then just to about 10 miles to the northwest of us, because we're on the south side of Hue, to the northeast of us, just west of Hue was Camp Eagle, which was the base camp for headquarters of the 101st Airborne Division, and so that whole area was very secure. And then right across the street from us was the main compound for the 24th Corps, mm-hmm. which handled everything, all operations in that part of I Corps.
Did you spend the rest of your time in Vietnam at Phu Bai then? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
When did you rotate back to the States?
I rotated back in March, so that's just a little less than a year. But at that time, when I arrived in country, that was at the apex of the height of the troop involvement there. And Richard Nixon had just been president the following. He was inaugurated in January of 1969. So by the time, then now it's 70 a year later. One of his promises was to start drawing down the troops. So as they were drawing down the troops, a lot of our rotation dates were moved up, but we still got credit for the year. So I had been back. I'd taken my R&R. I took it late. Normally they like to have you take it after you've been there, maybe about 7 months, 7 to 7.5 months. I took mine really late. I was actually, I remember my first sergeant got on me and he told me, he said, "Mitchell, you better take that R&R. You're not going to get it." So I took it. And I'd been back for maybe about 2 weeks. I'd been back for maybe about a month and a half, and I felt somebody kicking my bunk one morning because I had night, because my duty was mostly at night, and it was one of the guys from an orderly room. He said the first sergeant wants to see you. So I pulled on some clothes and went over and reported over the orderly room, and the first sergeant called me in, and I figured, I wonder what's going on here. And he had this big grin on his face, and he said, "You want to go home?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Got your orders." He said, "We got your orders." He said, "You're going to Fort Bragg, North Carolina," and he said, "You can either," and he said, "You've got about a week to clear post here if you want to." So they gave you a little time and everything to wrap some stuff up.
Backing up, but where did you go on R&R?
I went to Bangkok, Thailand, and went there because I went there. Well, it was interesting. I had been exposed to Thailand because I remember a missionary who had come to our church when I was a kid, and had showed me a lot of pictures of, and he had been a Baptist missionary in Thailand, and showed me a lot of pictures and stuff like that. So, and also this would have been in the mid-50s, and he also told me about that it was in Thailand at that time. The bridge over the River Kwai had been popular, and he said that story, and he showed me on the map where that was. So when I got to Thailand and I got in, the tour company that they have all these tours you can take and everything. One of them was a bus trip out of Bangkok to near the Burmese or the Myanmar border. And so you saw the Allied cemetery for the Japanese prisoners that had done that. So that was quite interesting. I'll start it over again.
Paul, did your unit take any rocket fire?
Yeah,
I took that when you were there.
I took rocket fire just about every place. When you're base compound, you're not in a firefighter very often. Some guys were, unless you have an actual ground probe if you're on guard duty or something like that. Usually it was we would take and rocket fire or mortar fire. And up at Camp Evans during the siege during Hamburger Hill, we took a rocket fire, and that was also very close to the first anniversary of the 1968 Tet Offensive. So that was a big deal for the North Vietnamese. So we were figuring we were going to get that. But down at Phu Bai, one evening we took a rocket in the neighboring compound. And later on, intelligence hypothesized that they were probably going after the officers' quarters over there. But what they ended up hitting was a warehouse. That was a warehouse, and that particular group of warehouses were PX warehouses that supplied all the PXs for Northern I Corps. So and that particular warehouse was the warehouse where they kept the liquor and cigarettes. So that thing burned for 3 days, for about a day and a half. So,
that kind of slow supplies down?
Yeah, well,
the troops?
Yeah, it did. It did. I mean, they cleared it pretty good. And down in Saigon, there were representatives for Butler buildings. Butler. And you call down there, they'll send a crew up and they'll erect another building very quickly, and they get them supplied and stuff. For us, like our electronic accounting machine and everything, that was NCR equipment. NCR had technicians down in Saigon if we had any, and we also had NCR trained technicians who were Army, right on site. I mean, there was a guy that all we had to do was call him. All we had to do was notify him, and he'd come running up and fix a.
Were there any casualties in your unit during the time of Vietnam?
No. Mm-mm. No, I didn't have to watch any comrades.
Let me ask you a little bit about life in the general life in the Army, and particularly in a combat zone. How did you stay in touch with family, for instance, back home?
By the U.S. mail, we did have Mars radio, which is a military radio which connects with a network of ham radio operators on this side, and so I was able to talk. I talked with my family and my fiance probably maybe 2 times each during that year. And what you did, you called the Mars radio office, and in my case, it was the early evening, and I would tell them when I was available and everything, and they would give me a slot. And
did the conversation go by radio waves?
Yeah, it did. So when you were talking, even though you were talking like you were by phone, every time you finished a phrase, you had to say over so that these guys could do the switch.
And then once it got back to the States, was it by landline from there to?
It was probably, the radio link was between the between the armed forces and the ham radio operator. Then he would actually dial up the number, the long distance call, and then the federal government would pick up his charge for the long distance call.
So you were talking on a radio then in Vietnam, and then
right
when I got back to the States, it
and so, but by the same token, the person who was receiving the call had to say over too, so that they knew when to switch back.
You're not really used to that too much, particularly civilians. I don't.
No, it isn't. So.
What was the food like overseas?
It was okay. It was okay. Logistics.
A-rations, I assume.
Logistics.
In the mess hall?
Sometimes, no, not very often. I had powdered eggs overseas, I think twice. Otherwise, it was fresh eggs. The only time I had sea rations is they would send them out on the bunkers, if you were on a 24-hour bunker. And but if you're just doing the night bunker or something like that, which was you would after evening chow, then you would report for guard mount, and then you were sent out. So you were sent out there about maybe 6 in the evening, and you were out there until about 8 in the morning.
What was your favorite meal from sea rations?
Let's see here. The scrambled eggs were in the can was probably the best. The rest of it wasn't. And the pound cake was okay too.
So it was okay for a day.
You know, it was. Yeah.
Not for a week though.
Yeah.
Right?
The spaghetti. Of course, the first thing you looked at was the day was the year it was packed. You know, that was on the box.
Yeah. Now, I know you were a supply guy, but I want to ask you about supplies. Were you able to get supplies for your supply company?
Yeah, and well, we were able to get supplies. We handled mostly it was repair parts for equipment and stuff like that. There was another supply unit that would handle, like the sheets and bedding and things of that sort. That didn't come through us. And there's some funny stories there. We were able to score some, how the supply is. The supply chain is it's regulated. But with that said, there's also the underground supply chain, which probably works more efficient than the regular supply chain. But there were little things like that. And it's just like everything else. There were some parts for some pieces of equipment that were very hard to get, and it seemed in our case, And I've talked with other guys who were overseas at the same time. Water pumps for 3/4 ton pickups were just hard to come by, and somehow or other we had gotten a pallet of those sent to us by mistake. Well, so regulations say if you get a commodity that's sent to you by mistake, you send it back to the next echelon so they can get straightened out. Well, we got these water pumps in, and of course we notified our motor pool about it and how many do you need, and so we gave them theirs, and gave them what they needed. And of course that was an under table transaction, you know, and then the decision came. Well, I remember it was there when we asked the he was an E7 that said, well, Sergeant, do we send these back? He said, no, you don't send those back. What do you do? He said, you hide them. And so that's what we did, and I think those things were used, and they were used as trade bait for steaks for a company barbecue. I can remember one, and also to the Air Force for some Ray-Ban glasses. They said we had a unit we had a company that looked like we were a squadron of pilots, because they were all walking around with it.
So the water pumps did not go to waste. Did you feel pressure and stress while you were on duty in various areas in Vietnam?
One night, yeah, I think when I was there I hadn't been in country very long, so the night leading up to the first anniversary of the 6/8/10 offensive, I was a little nervous about that, and some of the guys that had been over there for a while said, calm down, Mitchell. He said, there's really nothing you can do about it. You just got to take what comes. So that helped a little bit. But one night, I was out on bunker guard. You have to remember, I only did the 3 stints of bunker guard I did was in the first 2.5 months I was there. That was when I was at Camp Evans. When I went down to Phu Bai, I didn't pull bunker guard again for the entire tour. But one night, it must have been about 2200 or 10 o'clock in the evening. All of a sudden I see and on our bunker, on the bunker that we were at, there was it was right there, right in front of our bunker was the concertina wire, the razor wire that we had there. On the, and the bunkers are connected with comma wire and field phones. And I think every 2 hours, we dial up to the command post, tell them what bunker number we were, and just tell them, we hadn't seen anything. Of course, if you see anything, you get on the line right away and call them in. And you're within, you can see the bunker, the next bunker down. So there's always, and you can have short conversations between the guys on the other bunker by phone too. You don't want to keep things tied up, but just. So one night, and there were 3 of us on this bunker. We're just sitting up there, just kind of shooting the breeze and kind of watching. And all of a sudden, I see a line of tracers, and in front of our bunker was the comma wire, and then out from that was kind of a slow grade down to a rice paddy. And then the rice paddy, and then there was another hill up, and then on the other side of that hill was a little village. Now this is a Camp Evans. Well, we saw a line of tracers. It looked like it was coming back towards the bunker to our right. I said, that looks strange. I said, "Did you guys see that?" He said, "Yeah." And we called down to that bunker, and I said, "Did you guys? Are they shooting at you?" He said, "No, they're going to our right." And so he said, "Stay on the line," so I could hear him calling. You know, I hear, and at the command post, and they said, and he asked the guys on the other bunker asked if there were any units that were on patrol out on the other side of that bunker out in front of us. And they said, no. So they called headquarters at Camp Evans and operations headquarters and said, "We got any?" Said, "No, there's nobody out there." So I said, "Well, we just looked like we got some tracer fire." Said it's only happened one time, but we haven't got anything since. So they did. They sent a couple jeeps out with mounted M60s, and they also did have one with a 50 caliber on there and a searchlight. And they came out, searched everything. We didn't see anything. Nothing happened for the rest of the evening. But you were on your feet for the rest of the evening, for the rest of the night, until at least until daybreak, you know. So.
Yeah. What did you do to entertain yourselves then between firefights?
Well, we were able to listen to Armed Forces radio, and they also had Armed Forces TV too. But a lot of that time on television was given to the Vietnamese. So the Vietnamese, so it was all programming that was done in Vietnamese, and so I didn't watch television. I think for the entire, didn't even watch television when I was in Bangkok for that week that I was in Bangkok. Except in the morning, I'd listen to BBC News. That was just.
Did you have entertainers that came out to the field?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, there were.
Bob Hope show and that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, because we did have. Our compound was big enough that we had an enlistmen's club and an officers club. And so there was always groups coming out, groups from Australia, groups from Kuala Lumpur, and I think we had even had a couple. I think a group from Tokyo too came out. So.
And you had just one R&R then to Bangkok?
Right.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had what was called in country R&R. I mean, I was able to. Twice I was able to go to the beach. It was called Eagle Beach. It was a beach that was right at the end of an island, right at the mouth of the Perfume River, which goes up to Hue, and that was run by the 101st Airborne Division. That was their rest and recreation area and everything. So they would allow once when I was up at Camp Evans and once when I was down at Phu Bai. And they would allow during the hot season.
How many months, Paul, did you serve in Vietnam then, total?
Total would have been, I would say, maybe 11 months, 1 week, something like that.
Mm. Where were you transferred after that, after Vietnam?
Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Matter of fact, I had when I came, ordering me home on leave, I had two sets of orders. I had a set of orders order me for a 30-day leave, and then to report to the 158th Repair Parts Company at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I think it's called Fort Liberty now.
How long did you spend there then at Fort Bragg?
Fort Bragg, I spent, let's see, I reported there in, let's see, this one. Reported there in late April, and I was there until late January.
Of 1970?
Yeah, 1970. This is all 19.
So were you
Or
really?
1970, and then to late January 1971.
That's when you were released from active duty?
Yeah.
January of 71?
Right, yeah. Mhm. So that would have been, what, 8-9 months?
And where did you go after that? I understand you were in the Army Reserve.
Went home to
After-
Fort Wayne, got married, and was working and going. Was working. Was working and going to school, and I had some friends who were in the Army Reserve, and they needed, they said they needed DIs in the, it was the unit at Fort Wayne was the third training battalion. I'm thinking here, was the 3rd Training Battalion of the 70th Division, and which was an infantry AIT training battalion, and so I joined them, went to their DI drill instructor school, then went down to the drill instructor school for summer camp at Fort Knox, and got the shield the shield that the Army DIs wear, and also the campaign cap, the right to wear the campaign cap, and also got promoted to a hard stripe E5, and
then
and then
Army Reserve duty, then how long did you serve there before?
I served
before leaving?
about 2 or 3 years, yeah. Went down to Fort Polk, Louisiana, 3 years, I think. And we would satellite with a regular Army Infantry AIT unit, and matter of fact, they would turn the unit over to us.
Did you make any close friends among your fellow service members, either in Vietnam or later in?
Yeah, at the time, but we've grown apart. At Fort Bragg, I made friends with 2 guys. One was I can remember the names. One was Dale Findley. He was from Los Angeles, California, and Tony Rayona. He was from Long Island, New York. Matter of fact, he had worked as a clerk for the FBI before for the FBI Manhattan office, New York office before he went in. A guy I went to AIT with at Fort Lee, he and I went to Camp Evans and down to Phu Bai together too, until we rotated on that. His name was Mitch Moore. He was from Fresno, California. But I've lost track of all 3 of them. So.
Did you join any veterans organizations after the military?
No.
Yeah. What was your career, civilian career, after the military?
Well, that 76P20M, which meant mechanized, by the way, that opened up the door to work with the unit record, punch card systems and everything, and it got me interested in computers and programming. So I was a computer programmer and later on a systems analyst for several companies.
Okay. Well, let me just ask you, how did your faith in God and in Jesus, how did that get you through things in Vietnam and also through the general service in the military?
Well, yeah, it's always it's a solid base or foundation that you can always go back to, and you know, if you're in a tough situation, or if you think you're going to be in a tough situation, you figure, you know, I'm not guaranteed anything anyway, so, you know, I just got to go ahead and do what I'm ordered to do, and of course you have in a combat situation, or even in a near combat situation, you're going to do your part, because the guy on the left and the guy on your right is going to it's dependent on you, just like you're dependent on them. So you do your bit, and it's the same thing there. And I'll do my bit because, you know, really don't have.
You rely on each other.
You rely on each other,
right.
and I got the faith that, you know, I'm going to be taken care of, and if I'm not, well, that's okay too, you know. So, you have to you have to take a pretty pragmatic attitude when you go
Right.
in.
Well, Paul, I want to thank you for your service to our country, and
Thank you.
I want to thank you for being willing to do this Veterans History interview.
Okay.
We've been interviewing Paul Mitchell, who was in the U.S. Army during Vietnam and also served as a drill instructor in the Army Reserve later. Paul is, and I am, we are members of the Grand Rapids Paul and I, and along with Mary, are members of LaGrave Avenue Christian Reformed Church. And again, we've been interviewing Paul as part of the Veterans History Project, which is being done through the History Department at Grand Valley State University. And my name is Wally Erickson. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
We're doing a veterans history interview.